Hello world, double thumbs here. In my previous video, I said that the Sigma 16mm f1.4 is the best lens for the Sony APS-C cameras. But I also said in that video that if I could add one more lens to complete my camera bag, I would get this lens, the Sony 18-105 f4G lens. And I think this lens complements the Sigma 16mm perfectly because the Sigma 16mm weaknesses are covered by this lens, and this lens's weakness is pretty well covered by the Sigma 16mm, which I'm using to film this video. And it is quite well known that this Sony G lens is known to be the best video lens for the Sony APS-C system because of its constant aperture, wide zoom range, and amazing stabilization. Let's go see if this G lens is worth the price tag of $649. So we'll start out with some strengths to this lens, and the first one being the stabilization. And since the Sigma 16mm f1.4 doesn't have any lens stabilization and Sony's in-body stabilization in camera isn't the best, unlike the Panasonic stabilization, when you want to have a stable video, the lens stabilization is what you need to depend on. And the Sony A6400 doesn't have any IBIS, so it definitely will need the lens stabilization. And Sony 18-105 being a video lens, it actually comes as a kit lens on some of the Sony video cameras. It has amazing stabilization. Compared to the Sigma 16mm, which has no stabilization, it's like a gimbal. Well, not quite, but it's much more stable. And even compared to the kit 16 to 50mm f3.5 to 5.6 lens, which has OSS or optical steady shot, its 18-105's OSS is just much more stable. Okay, so vlog test. How stable is this? Is it pretty stable? I'm holding it by the lens, so it's as wide as it can be. So this lens definitely has one of the best optical steady shot or image stabilization among Sony lenses, and stabilization is key when you're doing any kind of handheld work. And that's the main reason why I bought this lens, and it did not disappoint. The stabilization is the best among Sony lenses. So moving on to the second positive of this lens, and it's the G lens image quality and the constant f4 aperture. And overall, I do like the image quality coming out of the Sigma 16mm f1.4 better, but it's not to say that the Sony 18-105 has bad image quality. I mean, it is a G lens after all. And this G lens means that it's one of the higher tiered lenses, and there's only 3 of these lenses in the Sony APS-C system, the 18-105 and the newly announced Sony 16 to 55 f2.8, which is like $1,300, and the Sony 70 to 350 G lens, which is also about $800, $900. So it's definitely the cheapest G lens that's available, and it's definitely more than good enough for a non-professional like me who just make YouTube and home videos. So if you don't need the best quality, then this is your all-in-one, do-it-all kind of a lens. And also the constant f4 aperture is really helpful in keeping your exposure the same as you zoom in and out, because you don't have to adjust your ISO or shutter speed at all to keep the exposure the same. And the third strength of this lens is its zoom capabilities. So the 18-105 in the APS-C world, which is 1.5 times crop, is 27 to 157.5 millimeters in full frame world. So the 27 millimeters is just wide enough for some vlogging, especially if you have longer arms. But in reality, you're probably better off using a ultra wide angle lens like the Sony 10-18 or the Rokinon 12mm f2. But it's not to say you can't use it, it's definitely usable as a vlogging lens. And the 157.5mm on its telephoto end is just enough to get some action shots when you need it. Obviously, if you do like to go bird watching, you might need a 350mm that 70 to 350 provides, but for a all-round lens, it's definitely good enough. And it's an internal power zoom, so the lens length doesn't change as you zoom in and out, and that's a huge positive when you're operating it on a gimbal. And also because it's a power zoom, it's relatively quiet. It doesn't have that sound that lots of regular zoom lenses have. Moving on to the negatives of this lens, and the first and the biggest one is the f4 aperture, and it's just not wide enough, and compared to f2 or f1.4 lenses, it's about 2 to 3 stops down, meaning it won't be able to let as much light into the sensor, so you're gonna have more grainy or lower quality image. During the daytime outdoors, the f4 is a non-issue. You might actually need an ND filter because it's so bright. But when it becomes the evening, the nighttime, and if you're indoors, then the f1.4 lenses are gonna look just much better. And I tend to always use my Sigma 60mm f1.4 when I'm using the camera indoors. But if I have a lot of handheld filming to do, then I still use this because the f4 of it is enough and the stabilization aspect becomes more important. And it's definitely good enough for YouTube videos and non-professional work, but if you have a brighter lens like the f1.4 lens and in a tripod kind of a situation, just use the f1.4 or a wide aperture lens. Although if you want some bokeh, the 18-105 at 105mm and f4 does tend to get a decent bokeh. So if bokeh is what you're after, you will get this with the 18-105 at f4. It's just a low light, it's not gonna be that good. And the second negative of the Sony 18-105 is its size and weight. And this is a common weakness for both the Sony 18-105 and the Sigma 60mm, just because they're quite heavy and they're quite big. And you choose these crop sensor cameras like the Sony A6400 because you want to be smaller compared to the big brother full frame cameras. But if you attach lenses like these onto the APS-C cameras, they end up becoming comparable to the full frame brothers. They're still smaller and lighter than some or most full frame lenses, but comparing these to some of the smaller APS-C lenses like the Sony 16-50 kit lens or the Sony 35mm f1.8 or the Rokinon 12mm f2, these look huge, and especially if you attach them to a smaller APS-C bodies like the A5000, it looks like you attach a body onto the lens, not the other way around. And it makes me laugh every time I put the Sony 18-105 onto my A5000 because it looks like you put a big Canon there and you just put a little board of plastic. In conclusion, the Sony 18-105 is a great do-it-all lens that is a step up from the kit lens in every possible way. And it complements the Sigma 60mm f1.4 perfectly because the Sony 18-105 can be used for any kind of handheld outdoor kind of a situation, whereas the Sigma 16 can be used for any kind of indoor tripod stationary kind of a situation. Great stabilization, great image quality, and a wide zoom range make this a great all-around lens that I can recommend to any non-professionals or professionals that want to produce a more stable footage without buying a gimbal, because gimbals can be quite heavy and large. But what do you think about this G lens that Sony produces? Is it worth the $649 price tag? Let me know down below, and until next time, bam!